It's on June 26th at 9 o'clock, and we're going to call the General Government Committee meeting to order. Could we have a roll call, please?
Chair Hashak,
Here.
Supervisor Mulhern.
Here.
Okay, and I'm going to ask Sarah Burney to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Sarah. All right. So, before we get going on the Cannabis Department report, I'd like to go over a couple things first. First of all, we received an email from the auditor, controller, treasurer, tax collector about cannabis taxes. And so I just wanted to go over those with people. For the payment plans that we instituted, let's see, there were 28 of them that came in with $64,000 initial payment amounts, and the deadline to apply was May 31st. Okay, so that's a good start, and those will go over the next couple years. Okay, amnesty for the penalties and interest, there were 7 of them that came in for $28,000. Okay, and then the 2022 true-up appeals, the due date was on April 28th. There were 70, and so it suspended $286,000 waiting on appeals process. So that is pending, that process. And then the 2022 true-ups, due date was May 31st, and so paid were $298, which was $1.05 million. That included the penalties and interest. And the unpaid were $523, which is $2.05 million. So, and that was the tax only. So the delinquent true-up notices have been sent out. And the cannabis taxes received in the fiscal year 22-23 so far was $2.359 million. And that's a revised from the budget. The revised budget was $1.5 million, and that got revised from $1 million, I think. And so the auditor, controller, treasurer, tax collector wanted to make sure that we understood that this includes revenues from the 2 quarters of the 2022 tax year, the 2022 tax year true-ups, the first quarter of 23 tax year, plus some delinquent prior year. And so it's over about $850,000 more than in the budget. The auditor, controller, treasurer, tax collector wanted to make sure that we understood that with the 50% reduction that, it could go down for next year, but this year it's looking good for what we've brought in. Okay. And then another issue that I sent a memo on the renewal process, and the renewal process has been it's something that takes a lot of time from the cannabis department, and with the new process of streamlining, my proposal was that we do the renewal process every probably 5 years, unless there's a problem or issue that goes on before that, such as changing the type of cultivation or the size, or if there are complaints or issues arise around that cultivation site. But if we could do away with the annual renewals, that would certainly help out the department, I think, and help out the cannabis community without having to do this bureaucratic step every year. And so, yeah.
Elora Babini, Chief Planner, Mendocino County Cannabis Department, and I am definitely in favor of looking at that in our next round of streamlining. The only comment that I do have is a lot of the issued between 2017 and 2019 were pre the sensitive species habitat review process occurring. So once that happens for every licensed CCBL holder, then I do believe that that process can be streamlined into a 3-5 year renewal process unless a modification occurs. They would have to go through that prior to us extending out that review time because it will help them in their annual licensure.
Very good. Yeah. So the idea is, that's what the idea I'm putting out there. I don't know if Supervisor Mulherin is in agreement with that, but, and I think County Council, we've talked.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, just to be clear, I think what you're discussing is putting on a future agenda item for more detailed analysis and possible recommendation for drafting that change. I do think we need to agendize it to give everyone sort of notice that it was coming before the committee could really get too much into the discussion on the details of that.
Right, and the hope would be that it would be with the changes to the ordinance in the next phase, coming later this summer, that we could incorporate those.
Yeah, and just in an effort to streamline the conversation, 5 years is fine with me. If we go beyond the 3 years, that'd be fine for that to come back.
Okay. All right, so we'll have it on the agenda for the next meeting. Okay. And then, let's see. And then Appendix G, that's certainly been a topic of concern and conversation, and I know that a lot has been going on with that, with the work with the state and everything. So that, so here's my question for County Council at this point, is that I know that you've had these discussions with the state Department of Cannabis Control about Appendix Gs and how we might be able to use the work done so that it doesn't go to waste. Is there any update on those kind of conversations that have been going on, or do you have anything that you could add to that?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. So I would say there's no definitive answer at this point. We're still working on it, but I did have a meeting recently with the state's attorney, and we were discussing some sort of strategies and options to potentially use the Appendix G document, not as something that the county would process, so not in its original form, but as sort of the starting point for environmental documents that may be appropriate on the state side. So the state's going to have a few different options in terms of its site-specific environmental review related to the issuance of its permit. Obviously, for the phase ones with provisionals, they've identified a plan and a funding source for using the EIRs, and then a site-specific environmental document generated by the same contractor to be able to proceed there. For the ones without provisionals, we may need to be looking at some other options, and we've been discussing that with the state. They believe that even an incomplete Appendix G document may be useful to them. We still haven't figured out the exact details, and there's a lot that's going to warrant a closer look. But the thought and the expectation is that the work that has gone into generating Appendix Gs, even if incomplete, may be useful as a starting point and potentially, best case scenario, a pretty quick method of generating the environmental document at the state level because of the overlap between sort of the factors that would go into the CEQA checklist, the information that was generated, and the form that it was in.
Okay, so at this point, conversations are still going on with the state, and nothing is definitive.
Correct.
Right? Okay. All right. And so with that, we have had some communication from the Mendocino Cannabis Alliance and also Chantal. And so we're taking those into consideration, and we'll probably go through the MCA memo a little later, but at this point, I'd like to turn it over to the Cannabis Department to hear your report.
Thank you. John Burks on special assignment as acting senior program manager for the Cannabis Department. Good morning, CEO, County Council, General Government Committee, and community. I'm happy to answer any questions about either the report itself, or if you'd like a line by line, I'd be happy to do that. And then in conversations that followed the Canada note regarding Appendix Gs, there was a request for the analysis that was performed by the department to determine, how we would best use staff time over the course of the next year to, 18 months, both with the contract planners and our in-house staff, to arrive at the conclusion that there was, really no additional resource to contribute to Appendix Gs, that the benefit to the applicants was realized, but it would be putting an additional burden on the department that, maybe our state partners would, help with in terms of making multiple pathways. But based on the direction that we're heading, we felt like it was really important to be transparent and clear with how we arrived at that conclusion. So that's also included. It was the second attachment. And I'd be happy to discuss what those numbers really mean in plain language. And I think that that's pretty much it. And of course, we read the attachment that you provided, Supervisor Hashek, and of course, that seems reasonable, to the department as well. So I'd be happy to proceed however you'd like.
Well, just on the processing timeline, and June 30th is certainly coming up. And so do you feel like we're on track with the plan?
So, Elora Babini, Chief Planner, Cannabis Department. So we have come up with a strategy to basically give the contract planners all of the under review applications so that they can assign them as they come up. They've assigned, I know our numbers are slightly off from our report because it was generated a few weeks ago. So we assigned them 359 applications. They have currently assigned to themselves 2 review. So they're in review, not just in queue, 203 of those. And so they're on track with the review. We have had a few non-responsive applicants that we've actually reached out to via mail since some of their contact information was unable to get through. They either got a kickback email and their phones were either turned off or they've changed numbers. And so we are making every effort possible to make sure that the applicants are receiving their any corrections letters or requests for materials that they need. But I do think that, with the 16 contract planners that we have, we are making strides. Fish and Wildlife has really, really been providing quicker responses to the sensitive species habitat reviews. I think we got almost 30 last week in response from our referrals that have been sent to them. I also, in line with the streamlining and the ordinance changes, I amended our process for the air quality review. So we're no longer referring those. What we're doing is we're taking those in and we're reviewing them with the new checklist and then providing those back to the applicant. So that is eliminating that need for referral and response from air quality as well. So I think it's going to advance our streamlining efforts.
Okay, thank you. All right. So with the plan and the management projection worksheet, did you want to go over that, or are there questions from the public on it?
Whichever you prefer.
Why don't you just go over it quickly?
Yeah, let me, John Burks, acting senior program manager, maybe I will try to describe it in the simplest way possible, and that will open the door for the conversation. So because we're using the contract planners, we're utilizing them via the grant funds provided through the local jurisdiction assistance grant, they are only able to work on items that have provisional licenses with the intent that all of this work will be to eventually jump them from their provisional to their state license. So the chief planner came up with a very reasonable plan to just put all the under review phase 1 and 2s over to them that have provisionals as the bulk of their workload. And then the MCD staff would take everything that either doesn't have a provisional, is a renewal, or a phase 3. And when we broke down the amount of hours that it would take to do those, and to answer one of the MCA questions that they brought up, is those times were based on the time studies from the previous process. So we don't know yet until we actually get some of the more streamlined reviews done of what that potential time savings is going to be. But that's how we did our projections of breaking up the workload into those two kind of buckets, and then just doing some math around how long we thought it would take to accomplish that. And it seems that the timing is going to be pretty good. So we feel like what's going to happen is there's a bit of a dam at the moment because we're transitioning from the old review process to the new review process, and we have a lot of these applications out for a referral. So what I think is that dam is going to break here soon for two reasons. We'll get the referrals back, and then the ones that the ones that have benefited from streamlining will also start to come to fruition, so that things will really start to flow. And if we can keep to our processing goals, we're hoping that the bulk of all under review applications will be done in a year. And the timing is good for the department because ultimately one of the things that we're trying to get to is self-sufficiency through the fees that we charge and not have as much of a general fund impact, if any at all. And we think that if we can get to that renewal sort of stage, that really the department is going to benefit greatly from that. The burden of the workload won't be quite as bad, and that we'll get to a point where hopefully we can have nearly total cost recovery. And as the grants begin to time out, and obviously we'll look for new ones, but there will come a time where we won't have that benefit. And so it seems like everything is coming together in a way where it's going to be pretty sustainable. So that was the analysis that we used, primarily to try to understand what the department reasonably could accomplish as it pertains to Appendix Gs, but it opened up a different doorway for us to realize, actually that we're in a pretty good spot, I think, as far as the numbers go, and, staff morale seems up, and we have a plan, and we like the plan, and then, we'll take any kind of, feedback from the committee or the public, with any possible improvements.
Okay. And, there is discussion about revising LEAP grant applications to use for the fee waivers, right? And so can you explain what's going on with that?
I sure can. Just generally as a strategy for myself and what we have been working on internally in the department was I felt that when I had started to engage some of the larger projects that we were being pulled in so many different directions with really not enough resources to accomplish any of them. So we felt like we were doing 10% of 100% of the items, and we weren't really getting a lot of traction in any one direction. So we just decided to pick up, the three big projects and do them 100% of the way, which was our component of streamlining, the LJ, grant revision and amendment, and a couple of different items. So now that we've gotten past that, this past week, we have been doing the deep dive into LEAP to understand how the records were maintained, where we were at with the contractor. There was just some general questions that I didn't know the answer to because I didn't have the exposure. So what we did as a department is get all the information together, get a dialogue going with the state, figuring out what the options were, where is everybody at. It was a little tough to track for me because there were so many kind of unique components to this, the cobblestone, the direct grants, the waivers, that how is this all coming together? So What we have started to do is unpack that, really do the deep analysis in this past week, and that's one of the projects that we're going to see 100% of the way through. Where our original goal was by the end of the month, because we know that the TTC waivers are, going to become extremely important here in the next week. But beyond that, I would say in the next couple of weeks, we really want to get everything LEAP related ironed out if that's possible. And then beyond that, we'd like to revisit the direct grant in that same kind of deep dive capacity for the LJAGP grant. So I don't really have any concrete answers for the plan to revise what those LEAP grants, how we would open it back up for people to be able to make amendments, or what that pathway would look like, if that's possible, because we're still trying to understand right now where everyone is. And then likely what we'll need to do is some outreach with everybody that's in the system at some point. So once we know where everyone is, we can get that conversation started. Likely we'll need to anyway. And part of our philosophy moving forward is just picking up the phone as much as possible to make sure that we're on the same page, because I think there's a bit of a history of confusion between the applicants, and I'm sure that they would, be happy to share about their individual experiences and what the department's doing and where they were. It felt very nebulous to me. So I hope to really get some clarity on that, but I don't have that to provide just yet, because I'm not sure that I have a thorough grasp. But as I start to pivot out of the department, I think it'll be in good hands with our newly hired senior program manager, Sarah McBurney. I think that she'll really take this and run with it in a similar fashion that's going to be acceptable to both the committee and the public.
Okay, and speaking of that, you have new staff. Did you want to introduce anyone?
Yeah, so as I had just mentioned, the Cannabis Department hired Sarah McBurney. She's the new Senior Program Manager, sitting right over there. There's a little hand wave, and then I'll turn it over to Alora.
To better help our planning staff, we also hired Matt Goins as our senior planner as well.
Very good. Welcome. Yeah, I think we're moving in the right direction with these people. And you'll be transitioning out soon?
That's correct. I'll still be available on an as needed basis, and I'm going to try to dedicate some time, where appropriate. I don't know what that will look like yet, but I know that obviously anybody that internally that needs me can get a hold of me, and I've still been working with some community members, as needed. So I think my availability will be okay for, say, the next couple of months. It'll just be maybe a day or two a week versus right now it's 5 days a week.
Yeah. All right. Thank you very much. Yes, Supervisor Mulhern.
Thank you. Before you turn it over to the community, I understand that, we are still shifting the plan. We're still working within the department to update policies and procedures in the best way that's going to be the most streamlined for the applicants and for our team members. And so I just want to say, I thank you for your patience, and I understand the frustrations, especially when it comes to the grant funding, but it's critically important that the county is careful with how we use those grant funds. So, I appreciate the work that Alora and John are doing with the department to try and maintain effective communication and be transparent. And at the same time, we are still shifting these processes, and I understand that it's challenging.
All right. So with that, is there anything else from the department?
No, I think that's it for now, and I'd just like to piggyback on that. Thank you for your patience. I know it's been a long road, but I hope that we're making some positive progress now.
Yeah, certainly. All right, so we'll go to public comment.
Check, check. All right, 1, 2, 1, 2. Everybody ready? We gotta restart that timer. Sweet, well, I'll just keep talking. All right, good morning, supervisors, county staff, Cannabis Department. Michael Katz, Executive Director for the Mendocino Cannabis Alliance. Appreciate the meeting. I'm not going to go through our memo with all the questions. My hope is that either we will do that after public comment or in a detailed email back from the department. We have received those, so there is certainly open lines of communication. To speak to a couple of items specifically, the fact that the time studies are kind of based on the previous set of expectations and understandings that we know are shifting, and with the fact that the plans all point to the timeline working now with that information before the future deadlines, it does seem like we understand there will be additional efficiencies realized. And so understanding that, I'm sure you'll hear more about the Appendix Gs after I leave, but knowing that on the back end we are going to save that time, I'm supposed to speak over there, knowing that we're going to save that time, it could also be a way to bank some of that and use it now for the small cohort of people who have already gone through that pathway. Additionally, in the document, the resource management timeline or projections identified that there are about 40 or so applications that will not be covered by the grant funding based on timelines projected. That aligns perfectly with the number of people who have already submitted Appendix Gs. So just thinking about these different pieces and how we could potentially fit them together within the county, understanding there are still these conversations going on with the state. On the equity grant, if those conversations are restarting, we have a lot of thoughts about how to address not just the issues that have already been identified, but the broader program moving forward with the state based on GoBiz's responses to the application last year. So definitely interested in getting involved in that. But yeah, being able to redirect some of those tax funds, some of those direct grant funds to taxes would be very beneficial. And appreciate the agreement on the 5-year renewal window. And so wondering if that could actually just be referred directly to the Board of Supervisors as an agenda item instead of having to come back here in a month. Don't know if that might be possible. And so, those are many of the questions. I'll have some good news to report at the public expression later on. And I look forward to hearing the responses to the rest of our questions in the memo. Thank you.
Okay, just a question for County Council with the renewal process. Does it have to come back to the General Government Committee and then we incorporate that into the changes to the ordinance and then that goes back to the board? That's kind of how I was envisioning it. But
Yeah, so that would be the normal process, is that the General Government Committee would take that up, possibly wrap it in with some other, there've been talk about other areas that may be appropriate for an update after the last streamlining. You might want to look at bundling a few of those rather than just doing a one-off ordinance change for each one. And then once you've got that packaged the way you want it, then you can send it to the board, and the board can then approve, make changes, or do it whatever else it prefers.
Okay. Very good. With the time study, Mr. Burks, you've already addressed that.
Yes, John Burks. We have. I'm just hesitant to make any projections assuming about the efficiencies created because there's been, some tracking issues with time in the past. So yes, I think that there will be some efficiencies created. That's my gut instinct on that. But until I have something to back it up with, it's certainly possible, and I think that it's going to happen. I don't know, until we get a month or two more to really observe how those streamlining efficiencies manifest in the timing. I guess we'll see shortly.
Yeah. And then the MCA memo, we have covered some of these issues already this morning, but would you like to deal with that today, or would you like to just respond to it offline?
Well, I think we've had a pretty efficient chain of communication where the department's been responding. It's helpful for us to see all of the questions, respond in an email. As long as that's not interrupted, I think that works, for the department really well. And I think that we've been timely in our responses, or at least better. So I'm a fan of that because I think it's a more thoughtful response, because I believe that if I tried to go through these right now, I think I would do an okay job, but probably not the best job.
Well, it would probably be best to do it offline if that's acceptable.
Yeah, and
Okay.
I'd be happy to take a run at it if that's
Yeah.
the desire of the
Okay.
committee.
Very good. All right. Any other public comment?
Good morning, everybody. Hannah Nelson. First off, thanks, everybody, for your continued hard work. It's certainly apparent. It's been a massive effort, it continues to be a massive effort, and I know that there's a high level of appreciation. Unfortunately, I think that some communication and responsiveness regarding the manner in which information is pushed out there, kind of on the really public, low-level, individual applicant level, still could benefit from some attention. And I really appreciate what Supervisor Mulholland said, that, we're still going through transitions, there's a lot going on. But in some ways, in order to not lose ground on these massive changes and improvements, it's imperative to put even a little bit more effort in to the communication part, and where it may seem insignificant or less important, from my perspective as somebody who deals with individual operators, and I'm kind of like a shock absorber for all of the frustration, where there's a recognition that there's improvements we think, but then individual things happen without warning, without explaining, without taking into account considerations of how operationally it's going to impact people, and kind of have a little bit of an understanding that every single thing like that is an enormous impact, even small things. And I'm going to give a couple of really small examples, as not to nitpick on these items, but more to give just color to what I'm saying. The switch from air quality, where MCD has now incorporated that it now is insisting, even though there are people who have submitted the exact same information 3 times on 3 different new forms at various times, now everybody has to once again fill out a brand new form, not because the information changed on the applicant's end, but because MCD's process has changed, and the form allows MCD to say, okay, we've internally done the part that we're supposed to do now, we send it back to the applicant, and the applicant has to send it in. There was 0 advance warning, 0 messaging, and it just feels like, wait, we just went through streamlining, and you're making me do a form that I've done 3 times before for no reason. And then the way in which, and again, we have these layers of communication because there's contract planners, the way in which maybe the script is rolled out to that level is missing some historical understanding of what these people have been through. So in one instance, I had somebody they had the same information, they weren't changing information, they were requested to do this form. That was annoying enough for them. And some of these people have to literally drive into town, print it out, sign it, have somebody scan it back, anyway. But then a few days later, they were sent an email from the contract planner saying, okay, thanks, we don't process these anymore. So it made the person feel like, wait a minute, you just asked me for a brand new thing again, but you don't even deal with it. I happen to know better, because I've been dealing with a number of these, that no, it's not that they don't process it anymore, it's that the process has changed. So now for some reason or another, we have an added step. We send it into MCD, MCD sends it back, and then we have to send it to air quality. So the fact that no longer is needed to send to air quality is wrong. That's not true. The applicant now has to do it. And for some reason or another, they can't just send the original form that they sent. Anyway, so just that's a small little example of how increased information and letting there be a little bit more input about what are the impacts so that when rollouts of new processes and procedures and forms are done, the messaging can be coupled with it, taking into account the experience.
Okay.
I have a couple other quick items. I'm curious about the inspections. We haven't heard anything about the very, very glitchy transition to Acela. And I do have some specific concern about the Acela situation and the way it's rolling out, but also built. Understanding glitches are going to happen completely. That's not, a problem. But there are some really specific concerns. I will take them up offline, but I think that this is, again, a situation where the outward communication to the public has been very, very limited, and it's been like, oh, yay, we're changing to Acela, but then nothing warning people of certain things that are known problems that are coming up or need to not respond or need to respond. Another example, real specific, I had a modification. Nowhere was there any information that the old process, which is fill out all of the modification forms that are posted online and email them in and go through all that, that's changed. So we went through all of that. That got sent in. We're talking months in advance of when the person would maybe need these changes approved, just to be considerate. And a week later, get something finally saying, oh, you can't use this process anymore. You have to do Acela. One would think that that's no big deal, but it turns out that all of the forms were irrelevant. You have to hand input every single thing in again. So it's just not telling people what's coming up and that they're going to have to invest this amount of time. Okay, we understand, and there's glitches, whatever. The other question, well, the inspections are definitely something, both from a technical, how do you actually schedule it, because Acela is having some glitchy problems, but also just the timing of this, and when is this going to happen, and how are people, how is that rolling out with staff and the staff's training to actually conduct them? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any comments from the department?
Elora Babini, Chief Planner. So I am absorbing Hannah's comments, and for messaging as far as the air quality new streamlining process, just creating a template response to applicants that, this is the form that we're using, which allows us to internally review and then provide back to the applicant under 10A 1770. CCBL holders shall obtain, as may be required, all approvals and permits required by the Mendocino County Air Quality Management District pursuant to state and federal laws, MCA QMD regulations, adopted air quality plans, MCA QMD policies, and other applicable statutes. I think the messaging that, I want to provide to all of you and that we can incorporate into the email response is, okay, MCD has reviewed this application process. There is no other action further that we need to continue in the review of your application. However, there may be other things that air quality may require review. We don't need to see that as far as our review process. However, we're providing the information back to you that, we've either identified that you're in a known asbestos area, or the answer yes to any of these questions means you may need other additional permits from air quality. That's not part of our review process. And so just messaging that, I'm very happy to incorporate into the response that goes back to applicants.
All right. Thank you. Any other public comment?
Good morning, Corinne Powell. I want to echo a lot of what Hannah was saying, and she went through examples and comments pretty rapidly. I'll try to slow down because I'm only one applicant in this message. But my greatest concern right now is that those of us who did apply early for renewals, use the system that was in place then, and as things have changed, and as time marches on, I'm very concerned about whether the criteria from the time when we applied will be honored, or if there's going to be a completely new set of criteria for converting to the CCBLs. I don't know how that conversion is going to take place for Phase 1 people who now have been in the queue for review for many months. So we do need clarification, because everything that is appropriate to do on the ground for your farm, maybe now against some recording or reporting policy, I have no idea, but I'm concerned. And I know that some of my messages to John have not been returned. I'm sure he believes that everything can be handled, through announcements and things like that. But it's a lot of unknowns, and we don't know how to make decisions, and that's very difficult. Elora said at one time this morning something about SSHRs have changed from a point in time earlier. You said they are different now. I'm a little concerned about what that means for people who had received clearance from CDFW that there was, quote, less than significant impact on their project. Their project hasn't changed. I'm assuming that review would be the same. So if you could clarify that, I'll appreciate it. And I'm just saying again, stakeholders hopefully can be included in every process of our county's decision-making in this regard. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Babini.
Elora Babini, I'm happy to clarify. So the review process, we're still using the same Exhibit A, which is the scoping tool that was created with Fish and Wildlife. So if you have received past clearance and no changes to your project have occurred, that less than significant still stands. There is no additional review for your sensitive species habitat review. All that's changed is the process in which we send it to them. We used to use Filer. We no longer use that anymore. They've actually requested that we do it via email for their referrals. It is a quicker response time, and incorporating that responses must be received within 30 days. If an extension is needed by Fish and Wildlife, that must be in writing to MCD to grant that extension from there.
All right. Does that answer your question, Ms. Powell? Okay. And the continuity of the applications and renewals?
Can you clarify the question,
Well,
please?
My concern was just that if you were following renewal procedures from, say, December of last year, January of this year, how, if new criteria is going to require a different type of application than what was submitted under the criteria at that time and has just been pending in some pile since then.
So Elora Babini, so our records were converted to Acela. So if you have submitted a renewal, those documents should already be converted into Acela. And so you may not be submitting new forms. You may be some of the things in the request for the deficiencies. You'll be sent a notification from Acela requesting those deficiencies be submitted. Some of the build out in there is eliminating the need for some of the forms, and so it's just a direct input into Acela. But if you've already submitted those records, we have those on file that were converted to Acela. The only thing that has changed is our streamlining, utilizing the air quality process, where we are no longer doing the referral to them, and it's just an internal review.
Okay. Other public comment? Okay, online. Paul Hansberry?
Yes, thank you very much. Paul Hansberry, lovingly and legally. I have a couple of, about the renewal lasting 3 to 5 years. I'm wondering if there would be a renewal fee annually, regardless of what it would take to renew it. It seems like if there were no changes, checking a box would just simply be a matter of saying, yes, this has been renewed. I'm wondering what that process would look like. With regards to air quality management, it sounds like there's an internal review and then it's sent back. And, but does the department tell the person if they do need further review from air quality management? For instance, if you're in a known asbestos area, in order to have any kind of impact, you have to be grading more than 1 mile of road or more than an acre, disturbing more than an acre of soil. Otherwise, they have nothing to say about it. In most cases, that's not the case in a known asbestos area, that you're not going to be doing more than 1 mile of road or more than an acre due to the nature of the program and the license. So I know that I had to be sent because I was in a known asbestos area. If that's the case, does the board then say, yes, you will have to submit this because of our review, or no, you don't have to review it? You're in an asbestos zone, but it's less than 1 mile, so you don't have to worry about sending it in? I mean, or is the applicant advised by the department as to whether it's necessary for them to send this in and get a statement from air quality management? Thank you very much.
Okay, and Paul, just to answer your first part, the idea about moving the renewals to every 5 years would be to streamline it as much as possible. And so we'd have to look at what the logistics are of, the annual, like if something needs to be checked off each year or what. But the idea is to make it as minimally bureaucratic as possible. And such the fees would be minimal, if any. Right? Okay, Ms. Babini.
Elora Babini, just to respond to the comment, we do not require any response from air quality at this time, since we have done our internal review saying, we're providing this back to the applicant, taking into Hannah's comment as well as Mr. Hansberry's. We will incorporate additional language in the response back to the applicant, what their requirements are, which is just, we can't make the determination for air quality, and they've specifically in the past asked that we not say, we see you're in a known asbestos area, we're saying you're not doing less grading. That direction needs to come from air quality, not from us. And so we can say, we've identified you're in a known asbestos area, please go to air quality and have them determine whether or not you need any additional permitting or not. That's not our responsibility to make that determination, but we don't need any written response from air quality. Once we have completed our internal review process, we don't need anything else from the applicant for that.
Okay, thank you. Good morning.
Simone Pietri, there we go. Chantal Simone Pietri with Mainspring Consulting. Thanks for the meeting. Good to see everybody again. My comments have to do strictly with Appendix G. I submitted a written comment to both supervisors. I want to bring up a couple of points that I made in my letter that I submitted and ask some questions of the supervisors if you would help with the conversation. In general, the perspective I have is that the position taken by the Cannabis Department to no longer process Appendix Gs is to the benefit of the department and to the detriment of the applicants or permittees that are in the process. And throughout the comments that I'm hearing today, it seems to be the tone as well that the financial burden to the county is real and has been analyzed and looked at. This budget has not been balancing, although you did make comments regarding tax recovery being more than was expected. I think my point is that the position to make an economic decision that it was better for the overall financial picture for the Cannabis Department to not process the Appendix Gs that had already been received was inconsiderate of the plight of those individuals that have been waiting for them to be processed. And the cost to process those, I believe, could be negligible. So I'd like to hear better on a couple of things. One is, can that decision be discussed more? whether or not those that have been turned into the county but not yet been processed, the decision to no longer process them, that being what was put forward first in a CANA note and then in the monthly activity report. The second part of that is, so that's regarding those that have already submitted to the county, why have they not been processed? And if they're not good, can they please be processed? Basically, looking at that as an economic assessment with the mind for the perspective of the applicant cultivator, not just the mind of the county budget. And then the second is for all of those that prepared materials towards complying with this repeatedly spoken necessity of preparing their own project description and checklist, a way for those costs to be recovered through LJAGP or LEAP, ideally both. Some people will not qualify for the equity provisions that enable them to qualify for LEAP funds, to make costs incurred for CEQA document generation to be recoverable, even if those costs have been incurred prior to the date of the award being granted to the recipient. So it would be a retroactive reimbursement. And lastly, I'd like to hear better from County Council. The language has been really vague about like what may be able to be used later by the state. This has been touted, John, when we spoke on the phone before as well. And I think that it's almost like maybe you guys don't know, and so you're not telling us clearly what's going to happen. And if that's what that is, that's concerning. If you have an idea or you're in deliberation with the DCC, to just keep us involved in the communication, as well as please spell it out really clearly right now. Like, what is the potential for materials already developed to be used under the new EIR process? So I've got three basic categories. Those that were already submitted, handle those in one way now, process those. Those that developed their materials and have incurred costs, for them to be allowed to recover those costs incurred through LEAP LJAGP funding. And then in general, whatever has been developed, where can it be used, by when, and under what review process? And where are the discussions in that? And when are we actually going to get a definitive? Those materials developed by the applicant under the direction of the board and the department for the last 3 years. This goes back to 2020 direction. Let us use them. It's like a reversal of process on one of the most substantial pieces of the hoops people have had to go through. And lastly on it is also just the communication mechanism was really poor, delivered through a single sentence or two through CANA notes, and then through the same language repeated in the monthly activity report. It's insensitive to what people have done in order to continue to stay in the game. And by staying in the game, I'm speaking specifically to the forthright, taking action, early actors. These are the people that wanted to come in early, have done everything to be upfront early, to do the right thing. They're the ones that are getting penalized the most by the cost that they've incurred not being realized into the end document being reviewed and their transition from provisional to annual being realized. It's those that have sat and waited and didn't know how to do it, again, similar to the tax waivers, that are getting a benefit later on as the policy has evolved. And it's kind of like a Wild West game to just sort of wait it out. And I don't advise anybody to go forward right now with any cannabis permitting with the county, because you might waste a ton of money and not actually get anything realized, and then find out you only have to do 5 things instead of 100 that you were told you needed to do a few years ago. So to go back over I'd like to hear about the 39 that have been received but not reviewed, if those could please be processed. Costs incurred, if those could be recovered through a grant program. What's actually going to happen to site-specific materials, and what is the role of the applicant or the permittee to develop those, and is a private consultant going to be involved? Are the Appendix G materials that have already been created going to be used anywhere at any time? Thanks.
All right, thank you. So I think that, in my conversations with Mr. Burks about the plan for the department, about how to deal with the people who've done the Appendix Gs and also the ones who haven't, that the goal is to get as many people through the system as possible. And, it's certainly there's some budget considerations, but there's also the time considerations too of what the department has as far as outside consultants and internal capacity. And so I think those are both key factors in this determination that the best way forward, according to the department, was to just deal with everything as the state was saying that they wanted to. In the meantime, we've had these county council has had some conversations with the state, And I don't know if the county council wants to chime in any more about what is happening, but it certainly sounds like we're looking at pathways that might include using those Appendix Gs. And so until those conversations are extinguished and we come up with some kind of determination, we can't move forward with any kind of, reimbursement or using of grant funding or anything like that, because I think that the goal is to get as many people through the system as possible to their state annuals. So, County Council, would you like to add anything to that?
Just very little, which is that I don't know that I can really speak for the state as to what ultimately the use of the Appendix G is going to be. We are having conversations. I do have hopes that that's going to be productive. I see good signs. But until they're ready to actually make a statement, until they're comfortable enough that they've sorted everything out, I can't tell you exactly what that's going to look like. Remember that this is, at the end of the day, a state process. The Appendix G was done as a way for the county to take some of the burden off of the state. This has been a process of the state taking that burden back up again. And while we've definitely identified a clear pathway forward for, I think, by far the largest group, the lion's share. We've known there are these other categories. We are working on what that's going to look like, but until the state is comfortable enough to say what this process is going to be, I don't think I can really speak for them.
Ms. Nelson.
Thank you. I'll be brief. I think to echo what Chantal said, this is also a timing issue. There's communication and there's timing. And there's an erosion of faith to be regulated when perpetually people are, sure, things change, things shift, especially in a dual licensing system, it gets complex. But communication and awareness of the impact that timing is critical. And, these people who were early adopters, there's a whole nother category that I would point out that Chantal has spoken to before, which are those that were ready to finish up Appendix G, almost had it finished up, and were just waiting for the last LGGAP or LEAP funding, and they went away. At any rate, I think that it's important to look at creative solutions regardless of whether it was the county's responsibility or not. It's kind of like you break it, you buy it. And in this case, where the county over the years has alternated and specifically said, you have to do it this way, and the state has echoed it, and it has been maybe an imperfect partnership, but a partnership of directing local applicants of what they should do. There's some responsibility and some investment that's required to look back at these categories of people and say, okay, even if there is no way under the grant structure to reimburse for past, which would be very helpful and ideal, then maybe there's some other mechanism of crediting for future local taxes or other projects or something. And I just want to not let go of, if one thing is not feasible to compensate these people or help them particularly move along what they've done, that shouldn't be the end of the conversation. This has been a really long slog, and it underpins people's faith in coming forward and being regulated in Mendocino County and providing those taxes, which were, a little bit better than expected. I think that there's a big problem coming forward that we're going to need to address too, the next year, and the number of unpaid taxes and how is that going to work, but that's important. Another thing that I forgot to ask earlier, besides inspections, which I didn't really hear anything about the timing of them, was about administrative permits and what's going on with that, and that process and how that's rolling out. Again, There's been no MCD meetings, there's been some kind of notes, but not a lot, and there's just a dearth of information of process. Understand y'all are busy, I totally appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Administrative permits.
So, Elora Babini, administrative permits are not something that we review. It actually is through Planning and Building Services, and working closely with Julia and her staff, they have been avidly reviewing the administrative permits that come through PBS. And so again, those take longer than a ministerial permit since they do have to have referrals as well. And I know that they are getting through their reviews of those and are notifying applicants if there's any deficiencies from the administrative permits that they had already had that were incomplete. And so getting through that process, we have received a few from PBS. I'm working closely with Matt to make sure that any requests for comment from MCD are going back to them as they come in.
Okay, thank you. And Ms. Nelson, I hope that the state is listening to your comments too. You know, about creative approaches. Okay. Ms. Powell.
Thank you, Corinne Powell. Since we're bashing the Appendix G situation, I just wanted to bring to your attention, when I read the canon notes saying that the county would no longer process them, I sort of went back in time, and although I didn't go into tapes or minutes of meetings, I counted that there were 6 flip-flops on who was going to do Appendix G, whether the county was going to do it or not. And I just want everyone in county leadership to understand that those things did happen. We were all assured by the CEO's office in 2018 that site-specific did not apply. Our mitigated negative debt covered everything. Then we were going to do the consultants, and then we were not going to do them, and then the county department was going to do them 6 times, where we've been left in this situation. So please do everything possible to keep us informed and to push for some solution for us as quickly as possible. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Avery Edmonds. Thank you, board, staff, county council, new staff. I appreciate the discourse and the forum to speak. I'm a cultivator up in Willits. I have a provisional state license. I feel like my county permit status has been in good standing for most of my adult life. I've been involved in the regulatory journey in this county since 2015, 2016, and in the 9.31 program. Since then, I've had meetings at the Ag Department, I've had meetings at Planning and Building, I've had meetings at MCD1, and now MCD2 in Willits. I've always believed that the job of regulating this industry on the county level was a large and complex endeavor. And my experience has always been that county government and staff, excuse me, were operating in good faith and trying their best every step of the way. I'm here to share my story a little bit and briefly because I believe that it must not be clear to the board and to MCD staff how much the recent decision by county staff not to review Appendix G documents represents a huge setback for us early, first in the door, trying to do the right thing, cultivators in this program. And in this county, I think you don't often hear from me up here because, you know, my partner and I, our sort of business mentality is whatever the direction is, we'll take it. We're busy, we're working. You know, we have devoted the majority of our resources to compliance. And, you know, we decided early on that this county is where we want to be and that this is where our business would be fostered. Just to give you give some clarity, sorry, I'll try not to be too emotional, but to give some clarity to this sort of nebulous resources and what has been devoted. My partner and I have spent about $32,000 working with consultants and biologists to prepare our Appendix G materials and a CEQA project description for our property that we are currently on now, paying invoices as recently as last week. And, you know, at the April Friday GGC meeting, we were advised to continue to prepare these documents as we are in the July-August DCC renewal batch. And, you know, this latest reversal of course, again, is just like, it's the first time that I've felt truly like, you know, my best interest wasn't being considered. You know, I'm here today with my partner as well, both of us having had 2 approved LEAP grant budgets, yet not having seen a dollar of that money. Over 100 hours has been devoted to that grant application process by both of us, but it's yielded no aid. And I'm also here today having made, you know, the hard decision to sell a property in Willits on which we received the second issued permit in the county, and spent an additional $25,000 preparing Appendix G documents that we were never able to turn in or realize because direction from the previous regime of MCD was to not submit them until we got to renewal, and then renewals were delayed indefinitely. All I would ask is that you honor the most recent direction, you know, within the last couple of months, and just review the Appendix G materials that have been turned in, and for those of us who have permits or are in good standing, who are in the July and August batch. And, you know, thank you for taking the time to hear me and being here.
Okay, thank you. All right, are there any other public comments? Paul Hansberry.
Hi, yes, Paul Hansberry, lovingly and legally. I'm wondering if someone from the department or from the board might be able to call GoBiz and get a clearer interpretation of what they meant, what their intention was for reimbursement. The way that I read the application form was that reimbursement was for something that like happened 10 years ago, or something that was already done before the program started. It's my understanding that there are other jurisdictions that operate solely on reimbursement. You submit the receipts, and if it's applicable, then they reimburse you for it. For something that, like a tax, something that's happened within the time frame of the program, it seems to me that if something needs to be done in a timely manner, and there's bureaucratic delays in getting the monies or the checks in order to perform the tasks that are already on the budget, that reimbursement would be just a common sense. Of course, you would get reimbursed for something that's on your budget if you had to pay for it and there was a delay in getting the funds. If someone could ask directly for that interpretation rather than the black and white interpretation from the printed page and find out what their intention was, I think that we'd be able to solve a lot of problems and a lot of anxiety, both from the applicant and from the administering the program. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. All right, any other public comment online? Okay, with that, let's see, do we need to have a motion to accept the report, or? Pardon? Yeah. Okay, Supervisor Mulhern.
I appreciate the report. Happy to make a motion to accept the report. I'm hoping that there's a way, after reviewing MCA's memo and hearing the comments today, that County Council and the department can work on clarifying messaging and statements regarding the already accepted Appendix Gs. I think that it's because there have been so many changes to the processes, it can be really challenging for our business owners to have another change. I think that this is something that will benefit people in the long run, but I think it's very confusing. And so if you all could please work together for a clarifying statement that can go out to the public, I would really be grateful for that.
And I'll second the motion, and hopefully we'll have some more news shortly from the DCC, and that with that we can have a consistent message that will go out. And And my hope is that, and I know that County Council and the department will be working with the DCC to explore all possible options, especially around this Appendix G and the use of it. And hopefully they'll understand that accepting it and the work that's been done will be beneficial to everyone. So, all right, so I'll call the question.
Supervisor Mulhern?
Yes.
Supervisor Hashak?
Yes.
Motion carries unanimously.
Okay, item 3A is approval of minutes of May 22nd, 2023, regular meeting.
Move approval.
Second. Any public comment? Seeing none? Okay, I'll call the question.
Supervisor Hashak?
Yes.
Supervisor Mulhern?
Yes.
The motion carries unanimously.
All right, public expression for items not on the agenda.
Good afternoon, morning. Good morning, supervisors, county staff, Cannabis Department. Michael Katz, Executive Director for the Mendocino Cannabis Alliance. I'm commenting today to say congratulations and to inform the county and the community at large that recently the California State Fair released its award winners in the cannabis category. This is the second year that the California State Fair has included cannabis in their awards. And I'm proud to say that in Mendocino, we had 9 winners who brought home 16 total awards, and I'm going to mention them here in hopes that if the county chooses to declare some sort of special holiday or excitement about the quality of product that's still being produced here, despite all the challenges that we have faced. And so it's very exciting. In the Best of California category, taking home awards were Heart Rock Mountain Farm, Essentia, and Green Shock Farms from Mendocino. In the outdoor category, we took home 6 out of 10 gold awards from Happy Day Farms, Heart Rock Mountain Farm, Essentia, Martiwana, Green Shock Farms, and again, Essentia for a second gold. In the silver category, Essentia brought home 2 awards, and in the unique gold category, Emerald Spirit Botanicals took home an award. And last but not least, and then in the mixed light category, there were awards for Higher Heights and Family First Farms. And last but not least, in the indoor category, Woodwide Farms took home a gold medal. So just goes to show that some of the best cannabis in the state and the world is still being produced in Mendocino County, and we should be very proud of that and continue to work to stabilize and support this community and invite the world to share in our bounty. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, and that's certainly great recognition at the state level. Okay. So thank you, Michael.
Hi, Hannah Nelson. Just real briefly, it would be very, very helpful if there could be some forecasting surrounding the next phase of streamlining. I think that we know that it takes a considerable amount of time and effort, and that pre-planning and some of the hard work that stakeholders and staff did in advance of those forecasted meetings was certainly critical. And so with summer and vacations and return to school and whatnot, it would just be really helpful if we could work on some forecasting and get some projections so that we know when the bulk of that work is going to happen. Thank you.
Very good. And I think that, the next round is going to be a little more difficult, probably. More need for more community input on it. And so it will probably require a special session of the General Government Committee. Yeah, Ms. Babini.
I just want to say that I really appreciated the input last time we had a special meeting for the streamlining ordinance that went forward in May. I think there was a really great input from all the public and the applicants who've been involved in this process, and so I would love to see that again.
Well, that certainly seemed like a process that worked well. So, thank you. All right, any other public comment? Seeing none, we'll adjourn the meeting at 10:16. All right, thank you, everyone.